I don't know how that works if your picture isn't up, but I guess we'll find out. Or you can simply put something in the chat and I'll give instructions about that as well. So I'm Rabbi Valerie Cohen. I'm the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel Sinai. And when Debbie asked me what I wanted to teach this year, and I don't remember exactly what the topic was for all of Torathon, but I remember thinking when she told me that it was basically anything. It was just so broad in general, which makes it kind of hard to pick what my topic would be. I decided to teach something that I love. I wrote my rabbinic thesis on magic and demonology in Sefer Hasidim. Sefer Hasidim is a 13th century book called the Book of the Pietists, written in Germany, and it is filled with magic and demonology and superstition, and it is a crazy, wild book. I recommend there are English translations of it. If you ever want to see something really wacky in Jewish tradition, I recommend you look at that book and open it up. It is fabulous. That being said, when she asked, I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll teach about Jewish superstitions, and because most people know a lot of them. And when I decided that, I don't even know how long ago, I didn't realize that this would be the day after Friday the 13th. So irony of ironies, except that for those of you who were at services with me last night, and some of you may know as well, Friday the 13th means nothing negative for Jews. In fact, 13 is a very lucky number. But that in itself is another story. So I want to begin by asking you what you think. See, it's all going to be asking. Are superstitions part of Judaism? Again, if you want to respond in the chat, you can do that if you want to raise a hand. And then of course, I'll ask you why or why not when you answer. Are superstitions part of Judaism? So we got an absolutely, a yes. If you could add why you think so, that would be great as well. And if anyone wants to speak out loud, that's fine too. Just raise your hand, or in the reactions, there's this little thing where you can, oh, maybe it's not in the reactions. It might be.
Participants.
Yeah, thank you, under participants. I'm usually leading, so I usually forget, I forget where to raise your hand. At the bottom of participants, you can have a little thing. I'm co-host. It doesn't appear on mine. So, all right, so we have a number of answers in the chat if you want to follow along in the chat. Mysticism is a part of Jewish tradition. Okay, great. Although superstition and mysticism may or may not be related. Excellent. Some of them come from Russia, Poland. Superstitions come from everywhere, but we'll talk about that too. Long history of magic, amulets, demonology, a long tradition of women's arts. Maybe why rabbis are so feared. Excellent. Part of the culture. Not sure about prayer. Excellent comment. My grandma was superstitious because she figured it's better safe than sorry. Zev, excellent, excellent. Okay, so I want to go with Zev's comment because that was fabulous. Let's see. So I'm going to go to a quote actually from Sefer Hasidim because it explains it perfectly. And the quote is, "One should not believe in superstitions, but it is still best to be heedful of them." A very typical Jewish answer, right? So are superstitions part of Judaism? The answer is yes and no. It may not be part of Judaism as the religion, but it's certainly part of the Jewish culture. One of the probably most famous or best academic books on Jewish magic and superstition is by Joshua Trachtenberg, and it was written many years ago, but it is phenomenal if you like the subject, although very, very dense. And in his preface, he writes, when he talks about the history and the development of the Jewish people and of Judaism, he reiterates, as we all know, that Judaism obviously didn't stop with the writing of the Bible. It didn't stop when, at the turn of the millennia. It didn't stop even when the rabbis wrote the Talmud. It continued to grow, and we were very much influenced by the people around us. And we weren't, the Jewish people also weren't just encapsulated in action or belief by Jewish law or the practice or the directions of the Jewish leaders. And there is this whole development of what some people might call a folk religion. Folk religion would be ideas and practices that perhaps never met with the wholehearted approval of the religious leaders of the time, but they enjoyed such wide popularity that they couldn't also be altogether excluded. So that's how we get this quote from Sefer Hasidim, the leader saying, you really shouldn't believe in it, but you should be heedful of them at the same time, right? So really making sure you have both sides of it. Okay, great. Oh, interesting question. Superstitions are our way of having some control over the deity. It's us fighting back. Interesting. Okay, we'll have to pursue that further. So related to that, what exactly is then superstition? Not in a Jewish perspective, but just in general. Anybody have a good working definition, or do they think of what superstition is? Okay, so theurgy, Rabbi Lowenthal, you will probably have to define theurgy for people.
So I just wrote that in response to the previous comment about trying to, there also sympathetic magic is a good definition. Trying to exert some control by saying, okay, if I, I don't, maybe somebody else can think of a good example. Somebody can, yeah.
Throw salt over your shoulder.
I was thinking of that, but what are you trying to control?
Your luck.
Tap that left side.
Right.
I'm in the right place.
So salt,
You're in that room?
Yes.
Okay.
So salt is a great example, and we'll talk about salt. Salt is considered to be very powerful in Judaism, and a way to counteract evil spirits, which we also have to talk about. And so so we use salt all the time. Like, anybody have the custom of when you move into a new home, someone brings you salt? Okay.
Yes.
Have you ever asked why? Does anybody know why? It's actually to scare away the demons, right? So you don't know what, especially if there's been a long time since the last family lived there, or if it's a new house and there are other superstitions around the new house. It is to counteract any evil spirits or demon, because they don't like salt. Salt has, you might say, holy power in it, but not exactly. And so here you have that kind of sympathetic magic or theurgy. We may say, well, evil spirits aren't the divine power, and they sort of are. I kind of think of demons as which I can do another session on another time, demons as a theological sleight of hand. When bad things happen, especially in the Middle Ages, it was great to have a belief in demons because you could blame everything bad on them. But if you really had to push someone to it, they would acknowledge that we're strictly monotheistic, and of course God controls the demons, right? So it doesn't quite work. You have to compartmentalize it in order to blame the demons for all the bad things are happening, and separate the fact that that God's in control of the demons, thus theological sleight of hand. So God then, if we look at it, would send demons. You use the salt that gets rid of the demons. Again, superstition. So let's see some other definitions. Something you can do to control the future. Rituals that are supposed to lead to a conclusion or avoid a conclusion. If you do or don't do a thing, it will keep bad things from happening to you. Excellent. an example of a superstition is a baseball player wearing the same clothes when on a winning streak. All right, great. Okay, an effort to control the uncontrollable, and we have examples of it. So, so here is a working definition of what a superstition is. It's a widely held but unjustified belief, although religion could say is widely held but unjustified, but I'll let that go. A widely held but unjustified belief in supernatural causation leading to certain consequences of an action or event or a practice based on such a belief, right? So that relates to if you do this or you don't do this, then something will happen, right? So so if something happens and you spit 3 times, poo poo poo, right? That will prevent something bad from happening, right? That there is a consequence to your action, or a way to prevent something from happening. Or if you see something, now this is not a Jewish superstition, right? But black cats have a lot of superstitions in our culture and connected to them. If you see a black cat, then that's a bad omen. That's a superstition. It is a causation. It is clearly supernatural. And then thus we have the problem with Judaism, right? That if a superstition is supernatural, what is the source of the superstition? What does the source of the superstition have to be? We're monotheistic. It has to be God, right? So if a superstition is going to be religious or Jewish, and really fit within the religious context, then God has to be somehow the supernatural part of that superstition. We can't have another deity or another power that is equal to God. So that's why we'll often hear, or not often, but there is warning and caution about superstitions. So I do want to go to a biblical passage that may or may not be familiar to you, that talks more about magic, but you could read superstitions into it. From Deuteronomy chapter 18, starting with verse 9. And this is the warning that we shouldn't get involved in this kind of stuff, right? If you link in superstition with other kind of magical realms, and there's a very fine line, it's not something that we're really supposed to be doing. When you come into the land which Adonai your God gives you, then you shall not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or who uses divination, or a soothsayer, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a medium, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination to Adonai. And because of these abominations, Adonai your God drives them out from before you. You shall be perfect with Adonai your God. So if you categorize superstitions, believing in those things among that list, or practicing in those actions of superstition, especially if it's sympathetic magic, then according to Deuteronomy, we shouldn't do that. Right? So, but then when you go back to the quote from Joshua Trachtenberg, it's about the development of folk religion, and that it becomes so popular that we can't really say don't do it because everyone's doing it, right? Who said way back in the chat, let's see if I can find it, about my grandmother was superstitious because she figured it's better to be safe than sorry, right? But often many of us hear about those superstitions because they're passed down in our family, or they're passed down in the community. And we might even say that many of our customs that have now become religious practices began with superstitions. So what would be a practice? I'm going to start from, you may have listed it before, but I'm going to start from where the chat is now. What would be a religious practice or custom that could have started from a superstition, do you think? Because y'all know a lot about these superstitions. Naming after the dead. Excellent, excellent. So, Ashkenazic Jews, who were probably potentially a little more superstitious than Sephardi Jews, don't name after the living. And one of the reasons behind it was that when it's time for someone to die, the angel of death would come for that person. And if that person had if two people had the same name in the same family, the angel of death might get confused and take the younger one instead of the older one. So you don't name a baby after someone who's living so that the angel of death won't get confused. So that is a superstition, but it's become obviously so much a part of our Ashkenazic Jewish tradition, potentially unless you live in the South. Many people name, we have many juniors and seconds and thirds in the South who are Ashkenazic, and it's not about other religions in the family. But that being said, very much a part of it. Oh, excellent. A name change during illness. So that's interesting. I don't know how widespread and popular that is. Is that a custom, or is that still a superstition? So that would be interesting to determine.
Probably both.
Probably. Well, yeah, right. So
I mean, I think that same dynamic, a lot of times, what a man would take on a first name Chaim, or a woman Chaya or Chava.
Right. I don't know if I don't know that one is as well known or as well observed as some of these others. So I guess that's what I was saying.
I think the Orthodox do that more so.
Okay, potentially, yeah. And which means, I mean, and I would say, I would add that something like naming someone, not naming someone after someone living is just completely widespread. And I think we have many of those. So Joel, I want to hear more about how you think that kissing a mezuzah or putting a mezuzah on the door could have started from superstition.
Well, it says in the Shema, we say to put a mezuzah on the doorpost of our home, but to put it on every room, you put it up and then, we kiss it. I think it's just to protect the person that's in the rooms, but it's clearly gone beyond the doorpost of your gates to put it on every room of your house.
Yeah. There are people who will say that a mezuzah is actually like an amulet, although there is controversy around that. So there's people don't like to say that. So yes, so it's not clear what again, people will disagree on the origin, but yeah, I think that there are superstitions around that. Let's see, angel of death is easily led astray, thank goodness, right? Okay. So Amy, when you hear someone is pregnant or other things that are good but still in progress, you don't say mazel tov, but rather bisha'a tova, in a good hour. I want to especially focus on when someone is pregnant. So there are a lot of things when someone is pregnant you don't do, right? You don't say mazel tov because our understanding is it hasn't come to full fruition yet, right? You don't tell people if you've chosen a name, you don't tell the name. Jewish custom is not to have, not to buy anything for the baby, although this is as less and less people are following these customs. Not to have baby showers. Baby showers have not traditionally been a very Jewish thing. So why do you think those customs developed? Amy, do you want to speak on that?
I mean, there's so much fragility. I mean, lots of people, a lot of babies would die, moms would die. I mean, the childbirth was the leading cause of death for women up until, I think, early in the 1900s. It might even been further in. Pregnancy and childbirth are dangerous. That's why you bench gomel after pregnancy too. I mean, that's and I think that it's just anything. It's sort of like, it's this, I also put about like kinahara, like you don't, whenever you say something good, you don't want to like, you know, like, and it's funny because like, I can't even, I got so focused on, oh, my grandfather is 96 years old, kinahara, that even after he died, I had a hard time remembering that I didn't need to say that anymore.
That's great. Yeah, no, so one of the reasons, Amy, I asked you to talk about that a little bit is because one of the reasons that superstitions develop actually come out of kind of a psychological bent. Sometimes they're just, you know, just part of the tradition and the culture around, but here's a great example about protecting our psyche. And Amy really spoke so well about infant and mother mortality at, especially, you know, years ago. We're so lucky with modern medicine today, but it still happens today. So that the Jewish community in our tradition was very, very careful in terms of how trying to create rituals or traditions or customs around preventing emotional attachment, as if you could possibly do that. But that was the attempt to do that to help with the psychological loss. So here is a superstition to help with that. Other superstitions related to kind of what I would call logic or morals or lessons or things to teach that sometimes just kind of make sense. So if you believe in a world where demons are very much a part of your world, here's where demons hang out. They hang out in latrines. They hang out in standing water. They hang out in all the places that you should avoid where sickness could happen. Well, that just makes a lot of sense. Not only that, but diseases were named for demons because it was so much nicer to blame a disease on a demon than it was to blame it on God or just natural life. I don't know much detail about it, but there are even superstitions around epidemics and demons and the cause for the epidemics, which of course I feel like I should look more into exactly now. Demons around, superstitions around pregnancy, as we talked about. There's, I would love to hear anyone if they have a moral to this lesson. There's a superstition around the idea that no three brothers should live in the same town. We could potentially change that to no three siblings should live in the same town. Do you agree or disagree? And what could possibly be the lesson around that? Carol's like crazy. Do you live in a town with lots of relatives?
Well, I grew up in a town with a lot of relatives, but I'm married to someone who's part of a family business, and my husband's father told him he could not join the family business, probably because he didn't want to have any problems. I mean, yeah, they all got along, but probably it's a good idea, especially since when you live in a small shtetl, you don't want to have sibling rivalry potentially in a family-owned business. And having worked with as a consultant with family-owned businesses, that's a real kettle of stinky fish.
It is the rare family, and God bless them, who can manage their business and do wonderful things. So here is another great example of, all right, so let's have a superstition, right? It's bad luck for three brothers to live in the same town. Instead of saying, right, if all three brothers live in the same town, you're gonna step on each other's toes, right? You're not gonna be able to create your own identities and have your own lives. You need to separate a little bit. It's so much better to just say it's bad luck, right? And if it's a developed enough superstition, then it'll work, right? So here's another one that I love. So immediately under a chuppah, when the bride and groom are, pronounced husband and wife, and they're about to leave from under the chuppah, whoever takes the other person's hand first, when they leave from under the chuppah, that determines who's going to be in charge of the marriage. So that's the superstition. So if the bride goes and grabs the groom's hand as they're leaving, she's going to be in charge. And if it's the other way, it's the other way around. Now, of course, it doesn't help if they know that superstition, and then there's a little tussle, right? But that's superstition potentially that has a moral or a lesson to it.
How about not hanging a portrait of a living person?
So that I actually wouldn't call, I don't know. I'm hesitating when I respond. I don't know if I would call that a superstition, or I would call that directly related to, maybe related to the 10 Commandments in terms of, or maybe it's a superstition that came out of that. The 10 Commandments about you're not supposed to have images. Jews for years and years did not do any artwork with any faces or images in them at all. I don't know the history because I'm not an art history is not my thing, but when that changed and artists started doing artwork, Jewish artists with images in them, but we weren't supposed to have faces at all because it would be worship. So maybe it's a combination of that. I haven't heard that one before, but there are plenty of superstitions.
Muslims do that. You won't find
Right,
any pictures of any faces in Muslim art at all.
Right. So they kept it, right? So we as Jews didn't keep it, but if you go back, not so far, I mean, go back a while, Jews did not do it either. So, and of course, if you look at Islam, we have so much in common when it comes to rituals. So that absolutely makes sense. I do know there is the custom of, I don't know if this is related, but I'm sure you all know too. In a house of mourning, right? You cover the mirrors. Anybody know why you cover the mirrors in house of mourning? And there are many different reasons. All right, Irving.
It has something to do with you're not supposed to worry about what you look like when you're supposed to be thinking about the other person. It's supposed to be a thing. But there's part of liminality where you're afraid that someone will come in from the other world.
Great.
The other side of the mirror.
Yep. Terrific. Yep, Dan?
I thought it was that if the spirit or soul of the dead person came and saw themselves in the mirror, they'd be scared because they didn't know they were dead yet.
Yeah. So these are both true, right? So and I think the second one that Irving mentioned is very similar to the one that Dan mentioned, right? So there's the superstition, right? So one is practical, one is superstitious, and then there's a third that I heard after I was ordained. And when you're in a house of mourning, where do you usually, when someone's died, right? Where do you usually have the minyan service?
In the living room.
In the house, in the living room, right? So you cover the mirrors because when you have mirrors, right, you might see your reflection while you're praying or somebody else's reflection, and you don't want to have any chance of praying to a picture or a face. So, again, superstition, custom, but here are 3 examples. One that is definitely superstitious, and the others, which may be more practical or maybe more religious. What's really, I think, cool about it is that we don't know which came first. The ritual, the superstitions, probably a little bit of both. Potentially the ritual came first and explanations came first. Maybe one, who knows, but it's great. Okay, so here, we've talked about a number of different superstitions, and I'll go thread through back in the chat in a minute. Now, Maimonides in his best moments did not believe in superstitions. He described them as if they were all self-fulfilling prophecies. He used to say that if you thought you were cursed because something happened, then if you felt that way, then you would probably be cursed. Or if you believe that bringing salt into the house would prevent anything bad from happening, then it was unlikely that something bad would happen because you felt that way. It was psychosomatic, right? So it was about how you thought and felt, not because those superstitions were true. So I wanted to ask all of you who are very familiar with many of these superstitions, and potentially maybe you do it. I mean, as Amy mentioned, she says Hora, which is from Ayin Hara, which is about the evil eye. So like there should be no evil eye here. But maybe some of you do some other ones. Do superstitions help heighten your sense of Jewish tradition or add to your Judaism in any way? And if so, how? I'd love to hear answers about that.
I don't know if I'm on or not. Okay.
You are, absolutely.
For me, my mother was very superstitious. So I learned throwing the salt over the left shoulder and doing all that stuff. And so I do it too. And my kids used to always laugh at me when I would do it, but it's something comforting remembering her. So that's what it is for me.
So what's your favorite one that she used to do?
I think the salt. And I don't even know what it really means. It was supposed to avert danger if the salt shaker spilled.
Yeah, right. So
at one
salt
point, salt was very expensive. At one point, salt was very hard to get. In fact, the word salary comes from salt. People would be paid in salt. So perhaps throwing it over your shoulder was a way of saying, we're willing to give up some wealth.
So you say someone is worth their salt.
Yep. It was very precious, which means it had some power. And even I don't. Someone's got something on that I'm echoing in. There we go. So it goes back to salting the sacrifices potentially. I mean, there is something about, although that was also practical, there is something really special in Judaism about salt, and it had the power to counteract these evil or demons or whatever you thought they might be, just bad omens. And it's very old in our tradition. There are stories of if you thought someone was some kind of demon or monster or even possessed, which we have stories of that in our tradition, it's bread and salt, right? So and those are the two things that you would bring to help potentially remove a possession of someone, but that's again another story. So Sheila, I love what you said, because I think that is true for so many things, in addition to not just superstitions, but customs in general, right? So many of the customs that we do may have religious value in terms of connecting us to God, may have religious value in terms of a change in ourselves as we become better people. And some of the things that we do are meaningful because it feels Jewish, or it connects us to people who were great role models or great Jewish role models, or we do it because Jews have been doing this for centuries. And all of those reasons are good and valid and authentic. It's all part of the many different aspects of who we are as a people and as a religion. So I'm really glad that you shared that.
This is the basket of the salt and the sugar and the bread that my mother gave us when we got married 40 years ago.
Wow. Thank you, Irving. That's great. So someone wrote. So Irving, if you could turn your sound off, because I'm a great echo in your. Yeah, great. Thanks. What is the difference? So Victor wrote, what is the difference between a superstition and a custom? Neither of which we may not know the origin or purpose of. It's a great question. I think that there's overlap depending on it. Some customs are written down in places, and whether it's customs written down in the Talmud or other texts that we have, and so that might give us some ideas. I'll give a great example, which is not in the Talmud, but we know to be a custom. I don't think it's related to superstitions. That would be the Hillel sandwich. For Passover, right? That is a custom. There is no law around the Hillel sandwich, right? That's when you put you have the matzah and you put the maror, the horseradish maror, and you put the charoset in, you eat it like a sandwich and it crumbles to all you know what anyway. So, but it's fabulous. We all do it. It's a custom. It's not a law. I don't think that there's a superstition related to it, although, you know, it reminds us of the bricks and mortar. But, you know, it's written in how when Seder's really developed, one of the things that you could do with Seder. So, so maybe that's just a good example. Great. So I want anybody else about whether superstition adds to their Judaism or Jewish practice or not at all, and why?
I would say not necessarily to my Jewish practice, but when we're traveling, when we used to remember the days when we used to be able to travel, when you hear someone say poo 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 or kenhora, you say, ah, here's someone from the tribe. It's a way of connecting with people that you might not otherwise connect with because you hear something that's so familiar. You say, ah, here's someone. This person speaks the same language.
Nice. And customs, right? Yeah, terrific. So great.
I had
Yeah.
something else too, just another example. It's not really connection to Judaism. It's sort of honoring your father and mother in a sense. My mother-in-law, Dick's mom, her father was in merchandising and they had a yellow tag sale at their store in Chickasha, Oklahoma, you know, many, many years before, and it was a total flop. So she had a superstition about the color yellow. And when our first son was born, and my mother went out to buy paper plates for the bris, she came back with some plates that had yellow in it. And Barbara just went crazy. And she said, we can't have this. Absolutely not. You've got to return it. Yellow's bad luck. We can't have this for the bris of the baby. So my mom did and got different plates. But even to this day, you know, I know that she felt strongly, and I know what the reason was, but it was a superstition, but it connects me to her and honors her memory.
Yeah, great. So. Thank you. Irving, did you have something?
Yeah, this won't go over big today, but in past days, superstitions were handed from mother to daughter, and Torah was handed from father to son. So it was a kind of thing that the mothers who were responsible for running a household, the superstitions came big there.
So I might disagree with you some because there are so many superstitions around demons and how to take care of demons and what you needed to do, that there are lots of actually rabbis who are passing those down to other rabbis and other scholars. So it wasn't just from men to their sons, but actually in the intellectual scholarly community, we're even passing around superstitions around demons. And I only know that from my research on Sefer Hasidim. We see a lot of it in the Talmud as well, especially about demons and those superstitions. So maybe it was categories, right? In terms of what superstitions were passed down. That
we all said we got it from our grandmothers. Nobody said from my grandfather.
Okay. So the superstitions that maybe we are more familiar with are those superstitions that we might call Baba Mises, right? Those are the ones that we're most familiar with. But there are this whole slew of them that, you know, I started mentioning that are not just from our grandmothers. And to add to that, if we're all mentioning that we got them from our grandmothers, it's not just women who are mentioning them, but men as well. So I'll just throw that in there.
Didn't mean to be sexist.
No, it's okay. There's a difference between talking about the past and the cultural in the past, as well as what we're experiencing today. So, all right. So let's see. All right. I'm just looking at my notes to see what I want to make sure I got everything I wanted to talk about. All right, so I'm going to try to scroll back and look at your comments and see the superstitions that y'all mentioned, and we'll see if we've missed any Any in particular? Let's see. All right, so the evil eye, right? So the evil eye is definitely a big part of our culture and superstition related to it. And I don't have tremendous notes on the evil eye. But it is exactly what it says. It's really, or in its origin, is the ability to bring about evil results by giving a really malicious gaze. So it began as like, I can give you the evil eye, not that it exists on its own. So there's this idea in many cultures that human beings have the power of sending destructive rays, we might say, to cause harm to people, which I hope you won't do. We see it first in the Mishnah. Let's see, but more developed in the Talmud, that some persons have this kind of power to really give this malicious to do it. So then superstitious practices were developed to ward off the harmful effects. But it developed so much in many different ways that it didn't relate to a person giving you the evil eye. That the evil eye, ayin hara, just came to mean something bad happening, right? So it kind of developed its own, I don't know, personality, you might say. Let's see. Another superstition, we don't count people to see, and it says we don't count people to see if there's a minion. We actually don't count people at all. And one of the reasons that we don't, there are many ideas around it, but it's also because we shouldn't bring a person down to be just a number. And it's not a good way of identifying people. So in many practices, there are ways to do workarounds. There are fabulous ways to do workarounds when counting people, right? So you can do not one, not two, not three, right? You're not counting people. You're not saying numbers. They're not one, not two. I had a professor who used to do that. What I tend to do is I count by groups, right? So I'll do 2 plus 4 plus 2 plus, right? So that works. So you can do it that way because you're not counting by one. The key is the superstition, you can't count by one. And then there's this fabulous one. I think Dan was laughing because I've shared it before. There's this fabulous one that we're told, and I don't remember where it comes from, that you can count by nostrils and then divide by 2. So if you have any problems, you can do it that way. It does not account for any challenges that any of us may have in terms of accidents or anything like that. So it is typically Talmudic or rabbinic where they don't think about those things, but there it is. Count by nostrils, divide by 2. All right, let's see what else. Right, we talked about mezuzah. Okay, so the red string. So I had no idea what the red string was until it became so popular in, through, Madonna's Jewish mysticism. By the way, I once asked Lawrence Kushner, who is really the best writer on mysticism for the lay people. He was a speaker at a congregation I was at. And I wanted to know like what he thought about Madonna and Jewish mysticism. And he said, you know what, doesn't really matter. Like it's not the kind of mysticism I'm teaching, but it's doing a lot to publicize Jewish mysticism in general. And it's not so bad for my book sales. So that being said, be careful of that kind of mysticism because it's not necessarily based so much on Judaism, but wearing a thin,
okay, just cut it off.
If you'll just mute yourself, make sure everybody's muted. Great, terrific. Wearing a thin scarlet or crimson string as a type of talisman is a folk custom as a way to ward off misfortune brought about by the evil eye. And it's often associated, I've heard of putting it like on a baby's crib, or things like that. So, so there are, there are things that you can do that it's, it's a protection, totally a superstition, right? There is, it's not, yeah. So Irving mentioned whisper the name of disease. I wonder if that's related to the names of the disease might be names of demons. And not the disease, not the way we refer to them, but in the Talmud, there's a whole list of, this is the name of this demon that causes this disease.
Rabbi, what's funny about the evil eye is that I'm a plague historian, so I'm having a great couple of months. But people used to believe that before the contagion theory of disease, that people could give each other disease just by looking at them, and it didn't matter the distance or any kind of thing like that. So it's very interesting because I grew up with a lot of superstitions around both disease and the evil eye. So it's interesting how misfortune and disease and the evil eye all interconnect so strongly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's because superstitions are all connected with misfortune, right? And how to avoid it. And so the height of superstitions really are the Middle Ages. So much of the origin of these superstitions really come from the Middle Ages, and so much influenced by the culture of our times. One of the things that I'm saying up here is not cutting a boy's hair until he's 3. That actually is I don't know if there's a superstition reason behind it, but that comes related to 2 things. One is we're not allowed to take fruit from a tree that's planted until it's 3 years old. So that's the 3 years old piece. And then it's also related to not cutting the corners of our hair, or men, so they have the payas, right? Not plowing the corners of your field, not cutting the corners of your hair. So they kind of merge together. And so the haircut happens at age 3, and then they're able to leave the curls as well. So, or they're not always curls, but sometimes they curl them. So those things are connected. I don't know if there's superstition behind it, but it could be. Let's see.
Yeah, I always heard, the reason I heard was that it was to mislead the angel of death. That if the child looked like a girl, here's talk about sexism, that if the child looked like a girl, the angel of death would more likely leave the child alone, or would not be able to identify that child because hair was too long. That's what I was always told, but I did not grow up in that.
Yeah, I haven't. That's great. I haven't heard it.
And the first haircut is called a schnipsel.
Okay. All right. So we just got the note that we only have a couple more minutes, and we could go on and on about all of these superstitions. There's so many of them, and there are many I haven't heard of. There are many that you haven't heard of. I just want to end then by with one quote by Rabbi Hanan Brichto, who was a professor at Hebrew Union College. And this is what he has to say about superstition. And this is what I'm going to leave you to walk away from this class with. He says, the difference between religion and superstition, if you're wondering, the difference between religion and superstition is that superstition is the other person's religion. So I will let you walk away with that. Thank you so much for coming. I know we kind of went around in circles, but I think that is the nature of talking about something like superstition. Again, Jewish Magic and Superstition by Joshua Trachtenberg will tell you more than you ever want to know about Ashkenazic magic, demonology, angelology, amulet, superstition, magic with God's name, etc., etc. So in less than a minute, we're just going to poof and disappear back to the great room. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening of learning. Thank you.
Asher kochech.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
the instructions are on, I gotta reshare that.
Now you have to get off and go on their link and you'll see it.
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't know if we can see that. Was that sent around?
It should be on the screen share right now.
Right, but that's like you can't click on it. Screen share.
Well,
we
At the
click
bottom
it.
of the original email, as you.
Oh, I'll
said,
have to look. Sorry.
It's not a link.
Oh, it's
Could you put it up in the chat?